Venom wasn't reserved only for Israel. He accused moderate Arab countries of collaborating with Israel on the attack earlier this year that killed more than 1,000 Palestinians. Israel said the offensive was necessary to stop rockets being fired into southern Israel. At least a dozen Israelis were killed in the war. Bin Laden did not name the Arab countries, but he blamed Arab leaders for not doing enough to stop Israel's offensive. For NPR News, I'm Del Gaplak in Amman, Jordan.
Al Jazeera is not saying where it got the Bin Laden tape, and the tape has not been verified. This is NPR News from Washington. An oil spill in Australia has forced authorities to declare 37 miles of the Queensland coastline a disaster area. Some of the country's most popular beaches have been saturated by an ooze of heavy fuel oil that spilled from a ship that was hit by rough seas on Wednesday. The BBC's Phil Mercer reports from Sydney.
In the seaside town of Coolum, dark brown waves have rolled ashore as stretches of sandy beaches in Queensland are contaminated by tons of oil. An unknown quantity seeped into the ocean after containers loaded with fertilizer fell off a freighter in rough weather and punctured the vessel's fuel tanks. The slick is now far worse than previously thought, and this environmental disaster has become a dominant issue ahead of a Queensland state election next weekend. The owner of the freighter at the heart of the disaster could face fines of up to $1 million if found guilty of environmental breaches.
The BBC's Phil Mercer reporting. Benefit concerts were held across Australia today to raise money for the victims of that country's deadly wildfires last month. Australian pop star Kylie Minogue praised the way the country has pulled together to help those affected by the blazes.
There's a thing we talk about a lot, which is the spirit of Australia. And I believe that it's in evidence tonight all around the country. And it's something that's recognized around the world. I travel everywhere, and that's what people see in Australians.
Organizers of the concert say they're hoping to raise more than $5 million will benefit the thousands of people whose homes were destroyed by the wildfires. I'm Craig Wyndham, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from Citgo and its nearly 7,000 locally owned stations, providing fuel for generations to help local businesses and communities. Citgo, there at every turn.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Jackie Leiden. The finance ministers of the world's 20 top economies met at a country estate south of London today to try to hammer out a common approach to pulling the world out of the economic crisis. The meeting was chaired by British Finance Minister Alistair Darling.
This is the biggest single challenge the world has faced in generations. In 1933, faced with a similar set of circumstances, the governments failed to take action together with disastrous consequences.
NPR's Eleanor Beardsley is on site. Eleanor, that's a pretty dire statement. What did they decide to do?
Yeah, that is a dire statement, and they did all decide that it's a very dire situation. They've decided to do whatever it takes for as long as necessary. That seems to be the mantra of the day. Now, they've said that there's not one solution for every country. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation, so every country will take the measures necessary due to its circumstances, but they really kept stressing the interrelatedness of the economies and the common approach, the coordination. Now, they did decide on some underlying principles, like strengthening the international institutions like the IMF, no protectionism, and more regulations. But what they really just kept stressing was the coordinated efforts, the commitment to work together until really the whole world pulls out of this. And listen to U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner talking.
I think what you see today is a very strong commitment by the leaders of the world's most important countries to move together, to do what is necessary to bring recovery back on track, and at the same time to begin the very important process of reform of the financial system so that we never again face a crisis of this magnitude.
Coming into the summit, Eleanor, were there divisions, pretty public this last couple of weeks, between the U.S. and Europe about how to fix things, particularly regulation versus stimulus and a sort of don't tell us what to do attitude?
Yeah, that's right, Jackie, and that was really emphasized in all the press. You know, the Obama administration was sort of pushing the bigger European economies to also offer huge stimulus packages like the U.S., but then the Europeans, especially France and Germany, said, you know, they'd spent enough, but a lot more regulations were needed because, you know, they really blame the Americans for all this, underneath it all, the freewheeling American economy. So there was this sort of regulation versus stimulus argument, but that was completely papered over here today. No one even talked about that. Several times journalists asked. It seems they're a bit spinning this meeting as one of consensus and success. So that really was not emphasized at all.
Were there any protesters or any commotion out there in the Sussex countryside?
Well, maybe a few birds fought in the trees, but absolutely no protesters because we are really off the beaten path. We're in Sussex County, about an hour south of London, in an old estate, a 19th century estate that's become a hotel. Winston Churchill used to stay here. And the security is very tight. There are bobbies up on balconies and under the trees. They even closed the pub across the street. And at one point, we were waiting for the finance ministers to come out, and a bobby sort of moved me over so he could search one of the sculpted hedges, and he had his gloves on, and he was prying and probing inside the hedges. So it's very well secured, and it's very far from everything. So nobody here but us journalists and the finance ministers.
Maybe he was just looking for a solution to the world economic crisis. NPR's Eleanor Beardsley joining us from Horsham, England, where the world's top finance ministers are meeting in advance of next month's G20 summit. Eleanor, thanks very much for that.
Good to be with you, Jackie. Thank you.
And as the guardians of the world economy meet to try to mitigate the deepening recession in advance of the G20 summit, the effects of the crisis continue to spread. Today, we're going to take a look at two island countries where the financial crisis has wreaked havoc far away from Wall Street. Ireland, where the banks were seriously overexposed to mortgage debt, and Iceland, whose collapse was so complete that within weeks, polls showed a third of the population was considering emigration. We're joined by Andre Snire Magnusson from Iceland and Anne-Marie Horahan of Ireland. Both our guests are writers from their respective countries, and they explore the impact of the swing economics on everyday life. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andre, let me ask you to give me a scene that for you was the top of Iceland's boom.
I would say that 2007, where the bubble money was really flowing into the economy. Our stock market had ninefolded in about 5 years, I think. The local airport was crammed with private jets, and out of one of the jets came Sir Elton John singing in a birthday party.
Well, Anne-Marie Horahan, I don't know if you can top that. You wrote a book called She Moves for the Boom, the Celtic Tiger Boom. Could you tell me something from Ireland that strikes you?
We had a lot of helicopters in Ireland. We had a lot of lavish birthday parties. We had a native celebrity culture, which we've never had before. One of our property developers got married, and he had his honeymoon on Aristotle Onassis' yacht, which isn't really where you would expect a middle-aged Irish man to be having his honeymoon. And now our bankers have been shown to have been really inept, and people are really furious, and it has had a very serious personal effect. A lot of people lost a lot of money, and a lot of people are very, very frightened, and above all, very, very angry.
Andre, could you tell us what happened in Iceland? I know it's a complicated story, but give us a writer's narrative.
Well, Iceland is sometimes like a human laboratory, like an experiment. So what happened here is some very successful students of libertarianism. They privatized all our old banks. They fell into the hands of people that were maybe not very used to banking, but were ready to take huge risks. And the banks started buying up most of the companies in Iceland. And at the same time, the government decided to double aluminum and energy production in Iceland. So into the economy at the same time was flowing like $3 billion. And that caused optimism, so people started to take loans. Housing prices double in a very, very short time.
One of the descriptions I've heard about Iceland is that it's as if the big banks essentially became like one giant hedge fund. And then, of course, last fall, the crash. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I always thought that it was some kind of a metaphor, one giant hedge fund. I thought it was something clever from a journalist. And we were always told not to interfere in what the banks were doing and not to have an opinion on it. And we never knew that if it would crash, it would fall into the hands of the public.
When Iceland really hit big trouble, there was a joke going around Dublin, what's the difference between Iceland and Ireland? The answer was 1 letter and 3 months. And that has pretty well proved to be true. People came home from abroad and said they didn't recognize the country anymore because everyone was so angry on the roads, so stressed out. Consumption was so conspicuous. They now have more time to say hello and be civil to you.
Andre, I'm just wondering what you think might lie ahead.
It's very hard to say. As soon as the bubble burst, there was an enormous wave of kind of optimism, really. People talking about everything that we did not do when everybody went to work in the bank. Companies and small businesses that would have flourished. But then there's this global recession, and our opportunities come in parallel with opportunities in the world. But in general, if you would just look out of the window and if you were a child, you would see that the schools are there and the hospital is there and the medicine is there and the roads are there. So the whole system really still works.
Anne-Marie, Ireland has gone through bleak times before. Recently in Northern Ireland, there's been the sad spectre of some of these horrible political murders, two British soldiers and a constable. What do you think is immediately ahead for your country?
On the Northern Ireland front, I don't know. I think although the shootings were terrible, I think that people have been encouraged by the united response from both the communities in Northern Ireland. In the south, it is very difficult to predict because there is a big anger amongst Irish people. We don't have highly functioning hospitals. We don't have a smooth-running education system in the way that I gather that Iceland does. So people feel very angry that the money that was made in the boom was squandered.
Your last book was called She Moves Through the Boom. Are you thinking of writing another?
Oh yeah, I am writing another. It's called She Moves Through the Gloom.
She moves through the gloom. All right. Has it changed your writing, Andre?
Maybe one of the things is everything is happening so fast that it's hard to write fiction because reality is kind of has the upper hand. My latest book was called A Self-Help for a Frightened Nation, so I think that one will be in print for a while.
I'm happy to see that the humor quotient is at least well topped up for both of you. Anne-Marie Horahan is a writer with the Irish Times, and Andre Magnusson is a fiction writer from Iceland. Thank you both so very much for speaking with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, economic troubles here at home inspire a stampede for free meat.
There are a lot of people out there who really like elk meat, and elk meat is high quality meat, very healthy.
Saving a few bucks, pun intended, at an elk meat giveaway. That story's in the next part of All Things Considered. Stay with us.
Filtered water stuff is taking forever to go through. I wonder if the filter's clogged up.
Possible.
Never taken that apart.
Probably time for a new filter, yes. Likely so.
You could just be fixing things all night. We gotta get him on TV.
Yeah, I have no shortage, limit to things that can be.
This, in this bowl, this is that last bite of little pie that you could give him with his ice cream.
Okay.
Do you care if I take the rest of that pepper jack cheese to church tomorrow?
No, please do, yeah.
make up your bed.